Hi everyone, welcome to Replenish Earth Live. I'm Tia Kansara, your host, and I'm very excited to be bringing on the show today some really fascinating people who've been doing some really cool work in India with the Matter Collective. I have Manan and Mudita. Manan is an experienced designer beyond the screen. Material tinkerer, he calls himself at heart, and a systems thinker, and facilitates the environment committee at the National Institute of Design, as well as curating exhibitions for the past 3.5 years in education in India and the Netherlands. And we're also going to have Mudita. Mudita Basari is an educational design strategist, currently working as the Associate Dean of Academics at the up and coming design school in India called the Design Village. And as a designer, she largely works with educational systems and has designed visual interventions, one of which we've worked on together in Goa called The Story of Space. And our particular exhibition was a dive into the environmental sciences, exploring where is it that you would hide your waste. And the topic in particular was who does the sea belong to? So without further ado, I'd like to invite Mudita and Manan to the screen. Welcome, Mudita and Manan. Very excited to see you both here. How's it going over there in India? What's the weather like? Is it as hot as it is in England?
It's actually raining, so it's quite humid. So it's probably
That's
worse.
nice. Oh, and where are you calling in from?
So I'm currently in Lucknow, and it's my grandparents' place. I've shifted here for the pandemic, but I hopefully will be back to normal life in Delhi soon.
Brilliant. And how about you, Manan? Whereabouts are you?
Hi, Tia. Yeah, I'm currently based out of Gurgaon, and it's quite near to Delhi, and the weather is a little humid as it's rainy and it's monsoon season in India. So, yeah, that's how it looks
Gosh,
like.
I wonder how much water is in India, like literally raining down from the sky right now, because I can hear it from here. So yeah, like really excited to be having a chat with you today, and there's some really fascinating work that you've all been doing. I would love to know a little bit more about what you've been doing, how you've been doing it, and of course, like, you know, the main sort of question that we've been asking is you know, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it, you can put it on my credit account. Oh, I mean the carbon account, right? So there is this entire relationship that we are creating with the environment, and I'd love to know from your perspectives, what's happening in India right now, what's going on.
I think from my perspective, people are not even thinking about the carbon account. So whenever there's sort of an activity that we perform, we're not really thinking what is the impact on the environment. We're really thinking about our everyday lives, and we're thinking about what is the most convenient thing to do. And I guess we're not yet imagining what credit we are creating and how could we repay this debt. So, yeah.
Interesting. What's the sort of you know, where do you think that the gap actually lies in the understanding on the environment? Because of course there's, you know, the environmental crisis that we're experiencing at the moment is a global phenomena. It's not just located to India or to, you know, the UK or whatever. So it's really fascinating to know from your perspective, where is it that the actual gap in understanding of the environment lies?
Um, Personally, when I look at it, I think climate change is something that we don't visually see at a slow pace. For example, currently there are massive floods happening all across Kerala and in Mumbai, and suddenly when we see the floods, we say, "Oh, it's a problem." But when the floods disappear, we stop thinking about them because on an everyday level we don't see climate change. And I think that's the biggest problem. We need to start seeing the impact because seeing is believing.
Yeah, one
Manan,
of
would
the
you like
things
to?
actually. Yeah, go for it,
Yeah,
please.
yeah. It's exactly like we are passively experiencing what's happening and the aftermaths of what human intervention has done. However, the graveness needs to come alive. It needs to be understood on a daily basis, and we need to understand what our actions are leading us to. And yeah, as Mudita rightly mentioned, the landslides in Kerala and the floods happening in various parts of India give you sort of it's in front of you, but you're not feeling it. So it's sort of the credit that you exactly mentioned that we are building, and there's still a lot of a lot of inertia from the legislation, because we expect them to take care of this and sort of connect everything together to understand what can be done, but that's not currently happening. Yeah, so this is the
Mm,
gap exactly that's
mhm.
happening at even at the grassroots level and at the legislation level.
Totally. I feel that, when it comes to the environment, there is seeing it, and there's really seeing it's as if it's one of the most strangest subjects I've ever come across, and that is um, Ishika, Mudita, myself. We happen to just meet by chance. Like, I was teaching in Sept in India, and a really dear friend of mine said, "You've got to go to," I think it was the animation show or something like that at the National Institute of Design. And I'd never been there yet. So, he wanted to introduce me to a few friends that could take me there and introduce me, take me around and talk me around. But he wasn't available. So he introduced me to a friend who then introduced me to a friend, and that friend was Mudita. And Mudita walked me around the exhibition, and we got talking, and it was really fascinating to have a cup of tea whilst also thinking about this subject of the environment. And of course, I was there at CEPT. I was researching smart cities, and it was an extension beyond my PhD. So it was I'm really in this sort of academic sort of mind frame. And there was this moment where I remember in the conversation with either or Ishika, one of them said, waste is your visual inspiration. As you walk down the street in India, any street in India, most streets in India will actually have some little customary pile of rubbish on the floor, and you'll walk straight past it, and it just you kind of you become so accustomed to it. You become so accustomed to the waste issue, right? That's only one of many hundreds of environmental issues, but for me it's the most obvious one. And yet there's something about it that when you walk down the street, it's like you're blind to it. Why is that? Why do you think that is?
I think it's habit. Like you're so used to seeing it that you don't see it anymore. And I think it
Yeah.
happens to all humans, be it with people, be it with objects, and you sort of forget it exists. And I think I've shared this story with you before. This often happens when you're sort of coming back to a city. It can be from a rural part of India, or it can be from the mountains, or it can be from a different country. And suddenly, like the smell hits you, and I think that's
Oh
when
gosh.
you remember. I think that is quite. Yeah, I remember having this conversation when we had met. I don't know how many years ago now.
Yeah, totally. I think one of those sort of like gaps that we're experiencing is not only in terms of the gap in being able to even see something as an issue, but it's the gap in trying to put those connections together. The gap is so wide that to bridge those things is to identify what from what to what is it connected. So one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing is how do we connect the dots between what is happening in the environment and our anthropogenic behavior? But also in terms of one of the questions that's quite dear to me, but something that we worked on also at the Story of Foundation, which was where is it okay for people to hide their waste? But actually, it feels as if the environmental protection and a whole aspect of it is so hidden and so private when it doesn't have to be, but it feels as if it is. So I'd be quite curious about, what is that? Why is that? How is that? How is it sort of becoming quite a private issue? And in particular, how is it happening as a private issue or becoming a private issue in India?
I think when I go back to the question of where do we hide these ideas, At the moment, we're hiding them behind the idea of the economy or development, because what essentially has happened with the pandemic is that the economy worldwide has taken a hit. And for the current government, it has become very easy to say with the new environmental impact assessment draft, we'll be able to give a boost to the economy. But the way they're looking at it
Right.
is that more coal mines and the economy goes higher. But actually, we're not looking at the climate change that we're going to create because of this. We're not looking at the number of people being displaced. We're not looking at the on ground realities. And the hidden word sort of becomes vikas or development in the country.
It
Yeah,
sort
it's
of
actually
feels
very,
like one
yeah.
one SDG at the cost of the rest. You know what I mean? Like, we'll do the environmental stuff. Don't worry about the rest. Sorry, Manan, you were saying.
Yeah, it's really sad to see that there's a prevalent myth out there that that sustainability hampers development. However, like there are numerous examples out there to show how they can be built together. Like this one at the top of my mind is how Thomas Rao, an architect, partnered with Philips in Netherlands, and they built a house which is built on performance economy, as they call it, and it surpasses circular economy. And it's like you could say that it's a step forward from circular economy, and it says that it shifts the responsibility right back to the producers. So now Philips has to take care of how the light enters, and you would only pay for the service and not for the product. So it actually ends up, they actually end up producing long lasting products because it's finally their own, right? So this comes into legislation. How can this be fostered by legislation, and how can this become a common norm, right? So this is why where it becomes a hidden and a private subject, where a lot of active participation doesn't happen together, and because of the biggest myth out there is that sustainability hampers development, and I think we've
Yeah.
been seeing it a lot in India, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that as you're talking about the Philips example is that it goes from you're buying a product to you're buying a service. Your
Yeah.
service means that
Yeah.
you don't really need to own the product. And one of the things that keeps on coming up is, in terms of sustainability, what is the biggest challenge for us? Is it that we want to be able to own something? We want to be able to accumulate something? We want to be able to like have it for ourselves? It feels like there's this desire to keep on having. I'm not just thinking about like single-use plastics, right? Like we don't really go out there and think we're going to have another single-use plastic today, but that's not an aspirational requirement or a desire. But there's something about the shift that's going to happen between where it is that we are right now, in our behaviors, in our economic behaviors as well, to where it is that we would like to go, but we're not too sure of how to get there. You
Yeah.
know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So that kind of brings me to the environmental impact assessment, and something that was really fascinating across the world. Of course, you've had a number of these environmental impact assessments, and amongst the first was probably the United States with legislation that was brought in into sort of formal status in 1969 with the enactment of the National Environmental Policy Act. And I know that in the UK we've had our Clean Air Act, and we've this is all very much sort of like post Second World War. There was a lot of movement around the subject then. But in Bhopal, there was the gas tragedy in 1984, like literally a year after I was born, because everybody was talking about it later. Oh yeah, you were quite, you were born close to the Bhopal tragedy. I was like, what? What's the Bhopal tragedy? So what's really fascinating is when something environmentally like devastating occurs, it seems as if somebody or somewhere or the community or the local council take the brunt of it. But a lot of that agitation is created by business and industry. So I'd love to know from your perspective, like in terms of these environmental impact assessments, there seems to be this sort of like a dislocation between them. It feels as if we're creating this sort of legislation to measure the impact, to examine the sort of externalities of development, of business evolution, of economic evolution. But how do we actually mitigate those negative impacts? What do we need to do?
I think, first of all, I know whenever we talk about the Bhopal incident, we always sort of use the word tragedy, and I always believe, and I've had multiple conversations about this, that that's a misnomer. We're sort of removing our responsibility. It was a disaster, and one must call it
Mm,
what it was. It happened
right.
because of negligence, because we were not following, environmental assessment laws. And I think in the environment, one often forgets the people that live around, because even today, generations after, people in Bhopal are facing the problems that came with the disaster. And by sort of calling it a tragedy, we're removing ourselves and saying it was inevitable, which it wasn't. So I guess that, and that is an attitude which is taken over by most of the people and organizations in the country. Even the current EIA draft notification, which is the Environmental Impact Assessment draft notification of 2020, really calls for these laws and these policies to be diminished, because we're saying that, you know what, the environment can wait. Our country needs to sort of boost its economy, and the economy can only come at the cost of the environment. And the environment can be multiple species being lost, it can be, greenlands, it can be the vast amount of human populations which are actually being removed from their homes and they have nowhere to go. So I guess, all of this comes together with the government saying, oh, you're not important. What I need to show is how the GDP has risen despite the pandemic. And I think that's quite sort of not okay.
Mm. What's the deeper what's the deeper challenge there? Because it feels as if there is a mismatch of value, right? The EIA has been created sort of like a legislation to recommend that something happens, but in particular with this EIA in India, with the legislation coming out very soon, and sort of a public provocation that has invited commentary by the 11th of August. So, if anybody wants to speak about it, this is the time to comment on it, read it, share it. Where does it fall short? Like, what's happening with the EIA in India at the moment that doesn't quite meet the standard, or where is it out of sync with its own integrity?
Manan, would you like to take that?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, there can be a lot of so in the name of streamlining the efforts and streamlining the process of EIA, there have been several amendments made, and 2020 talks about comprising all of them and releasing that out as a notification. However,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had a few instances where we talked about, okay, what goes out of hand, and one is post facto clearance, right? If you have already started the work, since EIA is an assessment tool to be done in the planning stages. However, the 2020 notification allows you to do the go for the post facto clearance, and that means that if you already started the work, if you're already in the process of doing it beyond planning, you can get a clearance for your work. So I mean,
But that's stupid,
that's one.
because like the idea that you've done whatever harm you have, and then you've done some. It's like getting planning permission after you've actually started building the building.
Yeah, but
And
I think
million dollar businesses having compensation of a few thousands and lakhs of rupees as post facto clearance. So I mean, that's not how it should go. We should go about it, right? We could
Yeah,
have better
totally.
alternatives to that. Yeah, Mudita, you were adding something.
Yeah, basically, so it's very important to understand that the previous EIA draft notification deemed some activities illegal. So, despite them being illegal, the current notification says you can pay a fine and get away with it. So I think
Oh,
that sort of
cheeky
shift
buggers.
is the problem. So we're sort of weighing the environment with how much rupees can you pay, sort of be okay with it. And I think that is a very, very big problem. And yes, of course, post facto clearance is making that possible. And I think, we're seeing the effects of it in Assam, where there are massive fires raging for over a month. People have been displaced. Imagine in a pandemic having to shift from your homes and, living in close quarters with so many other people, entire villages being displaced, biodiversity being lost. So I think, post facto clearance is just, yeah, a way of saying, oh, there's a stamp, I've given you the stamp, please go proceed with your work even if you've done the harm. and
But the
that's
thing
the
is that
largest.
there's much of that harm can't be, you can't go back and take put a yolk back into the shell of the egg, right? Like once you've hatched, once you've cracked, once you've done what you've done, once the harm has been made, it's going to be very difficult for anyone to try and like reverse that.
Yeah,
But also
it's
like
like,
cheeky to say that don't worry about it, you can just just pay this fine. But I've also had like little Dicky Bird tells me that it's actually the perpetrators that should be lodging the complaint against themselves. So
Yeah.
yeah, brilliant. If people sort of head to our page on Instagram, they will see this video, which really details out that there's a thief in your house, and the thief is supposed to call the police officer and say, you know what, I'm committing a robbery, and we really know that no one can do that. But I guess this brings us to a very serious concern, which is the idea of environmental democracy. And I think, that is being taken away from us because, as detailed by a lot of people, environmental democracy has three pillars. And one of them, of course, is access, which in India is very difficult to have. Usually, things like this draft notification are released in extremely complex English and they're not translated into local languages. And hence, people don't have access to, just simply understand what is wrong. Second
I
is
mean, I was
being
trying to
able to
read it
comment on.
yesterday, and there was so
Yeah,
much
it's
legalese.
so difficult.
I think I got bored. I mean, I just didn't understand what they were trying to say anyway. But I'm not a lawyer, so that kind of language doesn't really help me. So I can only imagine a member of the public whose first language may not be English would find it ridiculously difficult.
and
Yeah, so
also
I
and
think
also Indians, there's only 10% of the Indian population well
That
versed,
speaks
not even
English.
well versed, who know English, yeah, who speak English.
Of
Yeah,
like one
so
point something billion people. how how to create legislation that no one can understand?
But that's the point, right? Are we not seeing that's the agenda that we sort of try and pass legislation that no one will get? But at least I should really acknowledge the saving grace that our High Court has, stated that till you translate this and make it accessible to people, you can't table it. So I think, that's sort of the saving grace. But I don't think that's enough, right? I mean, just to be able to read it and not be able to comment on it after we're allowed to read, because currently we're allowed to make commentary till the 11th of August only, and the notification originally was available in two languages and now about five or six, and they're translating it in more languages. I know there are a lot of student groups and activists who are helping translate the notification so that locals can understand it. So, there is a lot of work that is happening in just saying that information should be accessible and people should have a say, because essentially it's environmental democracy that is at stake.
Enter the matter collective, right? All of
Yes.
it, like so this is really fascinating because of course you've got the agitation that people are experiencing as members of the public who are not being consulted for something that is so important to them, like their environment that they're living in. So how does the matter collective do its work? How did it start?
I mean,
So,
yeah,
go
Mudita,
ahead.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I think so. There are three of us here. One of us is Ankur. He's a classmate of mine, a very dear friend back from school. And Manan, Ankur, and I have been in conversation for almost a year together about just how Tia, you, Ishita, and I would talk about there is a problem. What can we do about it? Can we sort of get together and do something? And I think the EIA sort of offered that possibility for us. So what Ankur did was he's actually the one who started the entire process. He did massive amounts of research and he put together a blog. And in the blog, he sort of put down what are the problems, why is EIA 2020 notification not the right one, how is it affecting the environment, what kind of projects will go ahead. And suddenly, this massively complex information was easy for at least Manan and I to comprehend. Like, we got it. And I think Manan one day just simply called me and he said, you know what? Let's just make illustrations and make it visual information, put it out there. But after all, I don't think one or two people or three people can actually make this change. The idea is that we need to be a collective and together we have more power. And so, using our networks, we sort of reached out to illustrators and designers, and we just, yeah, simply translated all this complex language information into visuals, which just make information easily accessible and also help people take an informed decision. We didn't want to force people to sort of take action without before knowing what was wrong. Otherwise, we would
You
do
mean you
what the
weren't
government.
gonna you mean you weren't gonna bully them into making decisions and you
Right.
know there's like bullied activism, sort of like guilt tripping people into becoming
But
activists.
quite often. But I think our
Mm.
agenda was clear. We said we want people to take informed decisions. And usually a lot of Instagram posts are about, sorting through text. And we said, no, we're visual designers. Let's sort of create content in these 25, 26 posts, which divide the information from understanding after the Bhopal gas disaster, how did the EIA start? And then, what happened after that? How does it affect us today? And also just giving our 2 cents on what an ideal EI should look like. So I think, if people head to Instagram to our pages, the Matter Collective and Materianomics, they're likely to find this information. But Manan, would you like to add something more about the group?
Actually, will you tell
Yeah, I
me,
would.
Menon, like what's inside the link tree? Because I think you've sort of like set out a number of these sort of resources that people can use. So, what by clicking on your link tree sort of like link, they'll just get like this whole download of things, right? Is there anything in there that we haven't told them that is going to be in there? That it's sort of like the one-stop shop for everything.
Yeah. I would talk about the our campaign a little later, but I would like to answer this question as to what the Linktree link contains. It contains so we realize what action needs to be taken, right? What are we heading towards? One is that we have set up a link that can help you send an email to the ministry directly, and we have a pre-drafted email, and actually not a pre-drafted email, but a set of emails after realizing that the great work done by Fridays for Future India and Let India Breathe as two organizations who were actively engaged with EIA just like a month before than us, right? So they helped sending in a lot of emails to the ministry, and their links got banned by the ministry, and that came as a shock. And we were thinking as to how we could go about it, and then we were lucky enough to find a collaborator who could set up a randomized code for us, where we thought that we would be able to surpass the spam filters that the ministry might have set up, right? So there's a link at the top which says click here to send an email to the ministry. That's where after educating yourself, and if you are provoked enough to take action, you could send an email to the ministry. However, we also realized to make it more inclusive, we should have links which are available in multiple languages. So there's another link which redirects you to a page where you can have 8 and 10 different languages apart from English, right? And the other bit of it is that we also have the link to our video. Our two collaborators made the publication that has really come up as a compilation of the blog and our open call and the illustrations that we had. And it also
Really
contains
beautiful, by the
a
way.
link to our blog.
Really nicely
It
done.
it 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 also contains a link to our blog, as well as it also contains the notification, the gazette by the government, because we realized that people were finding it difficult to, find it. However, the Linktree link doesn't contain the link to our Instagram profiles. So I would like to talk about that, right? How the Matter Collective started, and Mudita mentioned that. But one thing that we were really sure of is to have a neutral standpoint. It's not that changes only bring negative impacts with them, but also as I previously mentioned, like it streamlines a lot of effort taken by the project managers to go through the EIA process, and it has done really well for them. However, there are a few things that are we want to we felt uneasy with. So we sort of took a neutral standpoint, and we projected the information out there in the form of the blog and visual, so it is easy to consume. And we were sort of bridging that gap, right? People not knowing about it, and how can we actually make it easier to consume for them? As we said, the Gazette was not easy to understand and consume. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was also really boring. I mean, 50-page document with no pictures, and what you've done is effectively created some humanity around the actual images and also like the information. So it's actually much easier to sort of pick up, even for somebody who does have a higher school education. So it feels as if there is much more humanity in what you've been doing, because you're inviting humans to actually participate. And I feel that that's exactly where the big challenge is. Where is it that this process of including the public can actually be increased, where instead of ignoring them and sidestepping, public engagement, we're actually inviting them to the conversation?
So I
Yeah.
think the step for us was understanding that Ankur, Manan, and I couldn't possibly be the only three people concerned. And how do we sort of make this a collaborative or a collective? And it really goes to saying that there are over 30 people from not just the country, but India settled all across the world who are currently contributing to it. And I think we realized that there are many, many more people to do that. We have multiple ambassadors. We have people writing to us every day saying, how can I help? So I think the first step for every citizen of the country is to understand what is the EIA draft notification. If they disagree with it, go to our link tree and send an email to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change and say that, you know what, I'm not okay with this notification. Please prepare a better one. So I think that's the first step all of us can do. But I think the other thing which we really need to do is help translate this information. For example, can we sit with a parent or a grandparent and explain to them
Yeah.
the problem? Can we sit
Yeah.
with the like in India, we have so many people who don't have access to social media the way we do. So can I sit with the house help, the milkman? Can I sit with other people I meet? Can I talk to the Uber driver that I'm, driving across the city with and just explain what is wrong and what can they do to help? So currently, of course, an email is the one way to go, but can we also facilitate that for them because that's available on our phones and it's quite easy for us to do. So I think as individuals who have access to this information, translated or otherwise, we really need to get other people understanding the problem. So currently, I know there are some farmers protesting against the EIA, and today, actually, there are people who are going to physically stand in front of the ministry and say the EIA draft notification is not okay. So, despite the pandemic, there are a lot of young people in Delhi collecting and doing this as of today. But again, the more aware we are, the better prepared we would be to ask for environmental laws in the future. Because honestly, we can't go on this way, and there has to be a shift.
Yeah, our communication channels are mainly by media, and we can always question, what the mainstream media is covering. And of course, they did not cover this, and that's where we come in with, multiplying our efforts with our collaborators, teams of lawyers and translators, and visual designers like us to, make this a mainstream conversation. Yeah. However, we have just started our route at, we talk about the two-pronged approach in our publication where, the primary intent is to send an email, or the urgent intent is to send emails, and we have been able to send 4,000 emails from our end. Right. But the bigger challenge is how can we build an environmentally woke society, and how can we make this a mainstream conversation? I mean, by giving simple examples like, you have $1 million to buy shoes after the development that you do, and you earn money, right? But you don't have the garden to walk with those shoes, right? And you don't have the but how do you actually build these metaphors? How can you actually make people relate to it and make it a mainstream conversation is quite challenging. And I think we have started our journey to do that.
What can the global community help you with or do? Because we often think about the issues in India are India's issues. The issues in England are England's issues. So there's what I've been taught from this COVID pandemic, for which there have been many deniers. A number of people right at the beginning of COVID were like, it's not happening. There's no pandemic. That's a load of tosh. They stand corrected, right? And for me, the pandemic deniers are like the climate deniers. It's not happening. It might be happening in China. It's not happening over here. So it seems as if there is this awakening and a consciousness that is coming about when it comes to environmental consciousness globally. But for me, the first step is, and I don't want to project, but for me, the first step is really to understand that there is a connection at all. Like this is one system, this is one planet, not going anywhere anytime soon. And if we don't do something about it, then whether it's in India, whether it's in, you know, I don't know, Bogota, it's still impacts people, and it's, he seems to be coming back online again. Just give us a second. Oh, we had a whirlwind internet reset, and just like that, the COVID has reset our lives. So yeah, like what can the global community do to help contribute to you know, the more emergency situation in India at the moment?
I think, as you rightly said, it's one environment, one planet. And I don't think we can sort of silo it anymore and say, oh, it's India's problem. We don't have to care about it. Because if there are carbon emissions here, you see the impact everywhere. Also, it's a largely sort of social justice situation, which also we cannot ignore at a global level. What I personally would really look towards the global community is to hold each other accountable. So, for example, India has signed COP21, which is a climate change action treaty, and this is a voluntary sign up. And India with France had really sort of said that we will go ahead and work for alternative resources of energy by using solar energy. But what is happening now with the current EIA is that we're drifting towards age-old methods and saying we need to go back to coal, we need to do more coal mining, we need to public, instead of having a public sector, make it privatized. And all of a sudden, we're sort of going back on our word and a promise made to the global community in good faith. So I think, we as a country and every country actually should be held accountable because it's important for us to do this together, or very soon it's going to be very late.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to add to it as it also trickles down to different. I mean, in design, we have learned this pestle model, and how do we, start thinking about something, right? It's there are various factors to it: political, economical, social, technological, ecological and legal, right? So how can we think of these different arenas or different domains as how they can help us in bringing this conversation alive, right? So how can technology aid it for us? How the bigger question is, how can we actually have objective validations by tech? How can we spread an awareness to these channels in a more no? I mean, it's the best connectivity we have in this global village. What role can data play for us? How can we gain objective validations? How can each person be actually called, what their carbon impact is, right? So that's where these subjective validations through different notifications, through different legalities that we bring in, how can we actually make it more objective? And how can we really bring it out that that economy and sustainability go hand in hand? And I'm sure your work revolves around it, and you would realize the importance of that. However, the intents are always good. I would like to add, at a very cultural and a social change level, bringing a change requires, actions are driven by intent, and intent itself, driven by culture, right? So how can we make it a mainstream conversation with, the lowest, the bottom of the pyramid? How can we make it a mainstream conversation with everyone? They aspire to, climb in the pyramid. So society and culture really plays a role, and the Matter Collective is a smaller part of it, helping, aiding how the information can flow better. However, there can be multiple ways to do that. So I feel there's a lot of work needs to be done at the social and cultural level, and I think that would in turn facilitate decisions making at the legal level, at the political level, at the economical level. Yeah.
That's what makes it so much more fun, because everyone can be involved, and that there is an opportunity for everyone to have a space in this, right? I mean, we often talk about how is it that we can move away from the fossil fuel industry. Well, you do it by your actions. You do it by what you believe in. You do it by, you know, what you put a stake in the ground floor, the integrity that you stand with. And just like watching a documentary does sometimes feel like the action that's required, because it's sort of, it's entertaining, it can be educational, but that in itself is not the actual, the step is in going beyond that. You know, it's sort of like this, it sometimes feels quite sufficient that, you know, I've done that one, you know, documentary viewing, and I've done my job, right? But it's interesting. I think there is, you know, an evolution in the way that we see our time, the way that we value our resources, not just, you know, in terms of, you know, money and natural resources, but how we resource our time and how we spend our time, what matters most to us. So there is a deeper connection point here with the journey that people go on to become aware of what's happening in the environment, and then finding themselves in it, finding their own, you know, representative position in it, finding their own, you know, the work. I'm kind of like avoiding the word purpose, but, you know, that kind of like that, finding your own core values in the work that you're doing. And especially because this is another layer that we're adding on to our lives, but it has to be there. It's not like one SDG at the cost of the rest. Like I said earlier, it is the foundation upon which we stand on, if we want to have a foundation at all, if we want to have a planet to speak of. And it's an interesting topic. But Mudita and Manan, thank you so much for joining today and telling us all about the EIA, the new legislation, what people can do about it, joining your link tree, finding you on Instagram, socializing with you there, engaging with you there, giving you the chance to sort of really reach out to as many people as possible, because this is exactly what it's about. It's about giving an opportunity to those people who would otherwise never have come across that 50-page document with the legalese that it sort of carries with it. But yeah, thank you for doing that, not just for India, but for the global community as well. And also from me, thank you very much for joining Replenish Earth. The lives are an opportunity for us to have conversations about real subjects. And if there is something that you're interested in bringing to our attention, please do get in contact. You can also subscribe at our Replenish Earth YouTube site, and, you know, please do share it. We'd love to know what you think. And so from us, thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.